you have diabetes. What did that do from a sports perspective? How did that change things?
I would just encourage people that if there's something out there that you want to tackle, that you want to take on, why not you? Why shouldn't you be the first person with diabetes to do whatever it is that you want to do?
And I got the same thing as you, the little Gatorade All-Stars, like the 12-ounce ones that were like blue and purple and red. I feel like I've been scarred because that's all I drank for like 6 years growing up. Welcome to the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where we take all of the mysteries of blood sugar control, focusing on nutrition, exercise, and any of the other 40 plus factors that may impact your blood sugar. If you don't know me, my name is Ben Zeal. I'm a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, strength and conditioning coach, and I've lived myself with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years. And I am here to share everything that I have learned in both my personal and professional experience so you can live that incredible diabetes life. So get ready and let's dive right into today's episode. All right, welcome to this episode of the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where we have our premier guest, our first one ever, welcoming to the episode, Rob Howe. What's going on, sir?
Hey, man, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be the first guest. Props to you for getting it done and finally listening to what your fans have been asking for years and getting to Your Diabetes Insider pod. Hopefully I can live up to their expectations.
Well, I was going to say, you're one of the big pushes that I've had to make this happen, is you've been kind of nudging me over the last, probably 6 to 12 months saying, hey, man, you're going to do it. You're going to do it. You're going to finally make it happen. And here we are. So I'm stoked that you get to be the first one on. So in case people aren't familiar, tell us just a little bit about Rob, the human being, and Rob, the human being with diabetes.
Yeah. So the way that I have described myself in recent years is I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an athlete. I have been an athlete on the professional level and at the collegiate level when I was younger. And now it's just really part of my identity and how I've continued to do what I love to do. And I think ultimately that's where I have maybe been a good example for people with diabetes, especially now going on 8 years, starting my own podcast, Diabetics Doing Things, which you have been an awesome guest on multiple times, and really getting plugged into the diabetes community to learn tips, tricks, meet amazing people, hear amazing stories. And, I think for me, going on into my 19th year living with type 1 diabetes, I think if I was sitting in that hospital bed and I was able to go back in time and tell myself what all I would have been able to be a part of in my time with diabetes thus far, I would consider it a big win. So I think my biggest sort of outlook for people, if they take nothing else away, is the life that you want is still out there. There's going to be obstacles, there's going to be challenges, but anything worth doing is worth doing right and worth putting your whole heart and effort into. So that's what I'm excited to talk to you about today.
I was going to say, you've done some incredible things, and I feel like every facet of life, every single thing that you decide to do, you're like, I'm going to do it, and suddenly it's the next biggest, awesomest thing. So tell just a little bit, obviously you've had diabetes for 19 years. Talk a little bit about that journey and obviously how that impacted you on the sports side. Because I know that there's going to be a lot of parents listening with kids that have diabetes, potentially a lot of athletes themselves, maybe, high school, college, and then people, like us who just want to stay active going forward. So talk a little bit about that experience. You have diabetes, you're diagnosed. What did that do from, a sports perspective? How did that change things?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed my sophomore season, in the middle of my sophomore season of high school. And contextually, that was my first season full-time on the varsity. So I was coming off the bench. I was like the sixth man on my varsity team that year, and was really, I guess, leading up to the middle of the basketball, like the start of the basketball season, so to speak. I really had my first success, and I had we played a pretty big game. I played pretty well, and had cemented my spot on the varsity, and also no longer was getting to play on JV anymore. They kind of moved me up full time, so that was exciting. And what's interesting for people who are listening to this with diabetes or parents of people with diabetes is that I was watching the NBA a lot. I'm a huge NBA nerd. I love the NBA. And that started at a young age for me. And I was following the Miami Heat that season, and Antoine Walker was playing on the Miami Heat. And on the broadcast, they were talking about how he was working his way and playing his way into shape. And so he was losing weight throughout the season. So I had been weighing myself, like you do in high school when you're trying to get your stats out there for colleges. You want to make sure that you're the right height, the right weight, and all that stuff. So I was noticing that my weight was going down. And I thought because of that broadcast, I kind of had that confirmation of, oh, I must just be playing my way into shape. I must be losing weight because of that. Little did I know that that rarely happens when you're an adolescent. That is mostly a fully grown adult type thing. Antoine Walker was like around the age of 30 at the time. So for me to be doing that was a little bit abnormal. So that goes back to what we know in the diabetes world, and what many of your followers and listeners likely know are the signs of type 1 diabetes: rapid weight loss, extreme weight loss, dehydration, frequent urination, fatigue. All of those things all at once likely equal a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes. So that was what had happened to me. And I remember kind of it came to a head. I went to a New Year's Eve party with my school. They had like they took us to the mall, and it was like kind of a lock-in type situation where we could go to the movies or ice skate or whatever. And I just remember I was going to the bathroom a lot. So I decided to start keeping track of how many times I went. And I counted 27 times I went to the restroom. And every time I got out of the restroom, I went right back to the water fountain, and water never tasted so good. So it was so weird. On one hand, I was peeing all the time. And on the other hand, I was giving myself props because I was like, oh, my coaches are going to love how hydrated I am. I'm like drinking water. I'm not drinking soda. Like I'm really, must be dialed in nutritionally. And little did I know, the next morning I woke up, I had some nausea. My mom looked at me and she's like, we need to go to the urgent care. You don't look well. And sure enough, they tested my blood sugar. They heard my symptoms. They tested my blood sugar and sent me to the emergency room because they assumed correctly that I had type 1 diabetes.
Holy smokes. I just would like to just put in context 27 times. How long of a period of time was that? Was that like
Yeah,
5 hours, 8 hours?
it was probably like 4 hours, probably like 8 p.m. to midnight, so to speak, like a really not long period of time. And just to be going like every 10, 12 minutes and really having to go too. I just remember like it was so strange to me, like how much I was peeing. It was just a weird time for sure.
There was no movie to be watched on that day. I
There
was
were no
gonna
movies to
say.
watch. I didn't ice skate. I didn't like. I did watch go into the movie, but I was like getting up and down the whole time. So it was just yeah, I didn't have a great time because I was like constantly having to pee.
Well, and I was gonna say, so that happens. You're in the midst of your sophomore season. I'm just gonna clarify in case people aren't sure. Basketball, of course. So you're in the middle of that season. How did that then impact, the rest of your season and really just the rest of high school into college? Because a lot of people, I feel like, I've told my story. I got my blood sugars impacted everything starting when I was 12. How did that impact you? Did you try to hide it? Were you really open about it? What did you do?
So it's kind of interesting. I will say, like as soon as they gave me insulin in the emergency room, I felt so much better. And I remember the nurse, she put me on the saline bag and she put the insulin injection into the drip, and I just immediately felt better. And I was like, cool. Well, great news is, guys, that I've got all the help I need. You can just send me home whatever you gave me, fix what was going on with me. It's all good. And they were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. This is not going away. This is something that you're going to have to continue to manage. So there was a period of time, and this is kind of before social media a little bit, early social media days. So I feel like everybody had started to get on MySpace at my school, but like it still wasn't like all the way through. So immediately, I think it started the rumor mill. Like I was in the hospital, and my basketball coach did come to visit me. He and his wife, one of my teammates' parents came by, and a couple of my friends. But there's a lot of uncertainty, just like there is today. Like, not, we talk a lot about stigma, but we also just, a lot of people don't know about type 1 diabetes and what it does to you. So I remember when I got back to school, people were like, well, some people said you died. And like some people said that you were, never going to come back to school. And so, uh, in high school, the rumor mill goes crazy, right? What was cool to me was how much better I felt immediately. Like clearly to me, the insulin, like it was type 1 diabetes. I was like, yeah, that's two thumbs up. That's for sure the diagnosis because of how good I felt after I got the insulin that I needed. So I missed one game. I sat out 1 week of practice and missed one game. I didn't miss any days of school because it happened over Christmas break. My parents were like, hey, well, you're ready to go back now. So just go do that. And I think to answer your other question, we were pretty upfront with it because we felt like we didn't have anything to be ashamed of. We got a lot of really great education at Children's Medical Center of Dallas. They told me what I hope people know is true is that any dream you have for your life is still within reach as long as you take care of your diabetes. And that second piece is, I think, where people like you are so important, because taking care of your diabetes is not just one thing. It's a ton of different things over a long period of time. Many of those variables, which will change as you continue to age and grow, and all of those things that we know. So I was set up for success in that way. So I didn't feel embarrassed about sharing the needle aspect and injecting and testing my blood sugar. I was still getting comfortable with. So my school gave me like a little space in the office where I could go give myself an injection. And I think a lot of that was just to like make me comfortable, like giving myself the medication and giving myself and like doing things, I was really good. I was like using alcohol swabs. I was changing the lancet all the time, all the stuff that you do at the very beginning. And so over time, though, I got more comfortable dosing, and people became comfortable like, oh, Rob is Rob. He's still here. He seems just fine. He just now gives injections and tests his blood sugar. So there wasn't a lot of shame around it. And then the good news is, on the basketball side, I had my best game. My first game back, I had my first double-double. I had 13 points and 11 rebounds in a district game. And I just felt better. My energy was back. My weight was back. And I felt like myself again. And I think that was just great feedback to say, like, okay, I think that I'm the same guy I was before. I just have to keep an eye on my blood sugars, and I have to, manage my diabetes, and that's just going to be a part of what I deal with for the rest of my life. So to me, I wanted to play basketball, and the gate, the portal to me playing great basketball was taking care of my diabetes. So I just tried to make sure as much as I could that my diabetes was under control, and I was doing what I could to put myself in a position to succeed on the court.
Well, and to go back to something you mentioned early on when you're like, hey, I came back to school, the office had a spot for me specifically to take my injections. I know when I was in middle school and high school, I had something similar where there was a person or there was an area that was designated for, hey, if Ben needs to go get a low snack, or Ben needs to test, or Ben needs extra insulin, it's here. So if there's a parent, listening, something I would definitely talk with the school about, because that is going to make life so much easier to know, hey, your kid has a spot where they can do whatever they need to do, and somebody knows and somebody is in the know. But that's going to be a whole separate scope. We could do a whole episode just on that.
I will just say that people with diabetes are protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act, especially kids in school. There's a number. I feel like it's not 403B. It's something 54. It's not a 540. It's something else. 504. Okay, so if your school does give you challenges, like, you are protected under that legislation, and that does give you, the right to leave tests if in case of an emergency, to keep a phone on you to monitor your blood sugar and all those things. So if you're experiencing those challenges, I won't say it will be easy, but there are programs to help you make sure that you get the care that you need at school, at work, etc.
We should definitely do something about that, because I had a 504 back in middle school and high school. I'm going to be straight up with that. But we go back to basketball. So obviously you had your first double-double, you came back, and then from what I know, you crushed that year, junior year, senior year. So then you got the opportunity to play in college. So what specific challenges did you find, elevating from high school to college from a diabetes standpoint? But then also, did things shift in how you manage things? Did things shift with respect to, the lows, or did you experience more highs or lows because of the intensity changes and all of that?
Great questions, Ben. You're crushing it on the podcast side. I think there's something to understand contextually. And, for my parents, my dad played college basketball, but it was in the 60s. So the game had changed quite a bit, and sport performance had changed quite a bit. And I think it's just really important to know that no matter where you go to college, the level at which you're going to be asked to exert yourself, work out, practice, and play is elevated. So very rarely do you go from dominating one level to immediately dominating the next level. Even though, kind of as an alpha athlete mentality, you kind of have that mindset, but I think the reality often is very different. And I felt that from day one, the first workout. I felt like I had put myself in a position the summer prior, as a freshman at University of Colorado Springs, that I had put myself in a position to succeed. And I think my first year of college just expanded my mind as to how hard I could go. I just didn't really know what that was like. And so it was a learning curve for me. I went to a small high school in a league that was not like producing a ton of high quality basketball recruits. I played on a top AAU team, but that was still kind of unstructured. So I went to this very old school, very heavy physical fitness at altitude, university, and I did have some struggles. I think another thing is that the honeymoon period, which often can last, 6 months, 9 months to up to 2 years in some cases, had kind of finally worn off for me. So I was now, producing very little or no insulin on my own, and so there were challenges, and I was still on multiple daily injections my freshman year. And you know, we kind of started the season hot, and our team had some injuries, and some some people left the team, and I was still a freshman. And so towards the last 10 games, I put together a pretty good stretch, and was a contributor, but did not play a whole lot. And so part of that was diabetes. Like, I had permission, and during the recruiting process, one of the things that my parents and I were really intentional about was discussing my diabetes with the training staff, with the thought that I was going to spend 4 years someplace. We should start the relationship off on a good foot. And, we also used it as like an opportunity to raise diabetes awareness for, to tell the story of like Rob has diabetes and he's still playing sports. And so I think early on, sharing my story with diabetes was part of what I wanted to do, just be an example for that, for other people with diabetes. So, at that time though, I was still a freshman. Our team wasn't very good. I made it through the season and had a couple of good games and felt good about going into the next year. And, again, like college sports is really a full-time job. Plus you're taking full-time classes. Plus you're, trying to, maintain a social life. So it's really a real exercise in prioritization and time management and energy management and nutrition, and all those things come along with it, as you, I'm sure, will talk about at length on this podcast. So yeah, I mean, all that to say is college is for real. I played a Division II school. There were 3 guys on my team who were over the age of 23 and I was 18. So just the 5 year difference, like you're going from being a boy to a man, and somebody being in those like college scenarios and having a lot of reps under their belt, there was a large steep learning curve right off the bat.
And with that learning curve, because like you said, you're already going from high school to college. There's already that I'm on my own, probably for the first time. There's the basketball jump, and then there's I have diabetes and I'm still adjusting because I'm within the first few years of that. What did you find, just from a blood sugar standpoint, was your biggest challenge throughout that first year, even you could say throughout the whole time that you were there?
I would say my biggest blood sugar challenge relative to being an athlete for me, and remember, this is like from the years like 2007 to 2000, let's just say 13,
Mm.
were my like 6 years of being a peak athlete after high school. Those were probably my years of the most elevated A1C, because basketball is high intensity and it makes your blood sugar go up. It makes my blood sugar
Yep.
go up. And then immediately after kind of crashes. So trying to manage the after practice, after games, blood sugars. I recently spoke with Lauren Cox, who's a professional basketball player overseas and in the WNBA, and won a national championship at Baylor and lives with type 1 diabetes. Practices and games are totally different. Games, your adrenaline is way up. Practices, not so much. So, even though practices are extremely physically demanding, there's not the anticipation or the stress of like a game there. So, it's a little bit easier to manage going up to it. But one of the things I had to change for myself, because I could go from a fasting blood sugar of 80 to going into the warm-up line before a conference game, and my blood sugar would be 400 without eating any carbs. So I had to change the way that I warmed up. In high school and like my freshman year and sophomore year of college, I tried to get as amped up as possible and like listen to music, get myself really going. And then at my sophomore year of college, I switched to an insulin pump. So I went from having that basal underneath all my workouts, underneath all of my exertion, helping me out, to having, being disconnected from the pump during exercise or when I was playing on the court. So learning to adjust with that no basal life. And I think I really had to dig in and build a pregame routine that would allow me to be successful, allow me to be able to play. Because when my blood sugar was high, I was not as good as when my blood sugar was in range. And, we could probably break down film and I could show you game by game, like which games my blood sugar was high and which games my blood sugar was in range. So I started a different routine. I went and got treatment ahead of time. I really focused on stretching. I really focused on making sure my body was ready, making sure I was hydrated, making sure I ate basically the same thing, the same number of hours prior to the game, so that I could be more in control of the insulin on board. I started checking my blood sugar during the national anthem. I checked it again during halftime and give myself insulin if I needed to at that point. Um, but it was a learning curve. It was a long process, and I feel like really until about halfway through my junior year, I didn't have a sustainable great routine. And until I got that routine dialed in, that was predictable. And a lot of times our schedule was unpredictable, and sometimes we'd be on the road and we wouldn't be able to eat the same number of hours, and like those things were challenging for me. But we were able to weather the storm, and I have to shout out Amy, Jenny, and John Michael, who were my trainers over the years, who really took it upon themselves to learn as much as they could about diabetes and about athletes, and like what we were experiencing from a blood sugar perspective. And without them really being kind of committed to helping me communicate with the coaching staff, helping me be my best self, I likely wouldn't have had the success that I had, especially later.
Well, and I feel you on the 80 to 400 aspect too, because I just remember pitching, through high school into college. I would start out warm ups at 105, and then by the time the game actually started, by the second inning, I was 300. And when that happened, I could not hit the broadside of a barn if you paid me $100. I would be all over the place. And I knew at that point I had 2 innings. And by the time those 2 innings were done, my focus was gone. I couldn't concentrate. It was just miserable. So I feel like for you, you're having to, post up and shoot and run an offense and all of that. Like you're probably not feeling good whatsoever. Would you ever yank yourself from a game because of your blood sugars to make adjustments? Or how did that process work within a game if your number was higher than you wanted to be?
Well, sometimes ignorance is bliss. So because I didn't have a sensor, I wasn't sure exactly where I was all the time. I had to kind of go off of my like feel. And when you're
Yep.
exerting yourself, like you said, your blood sugars vary and fluctuate wildly. So, you know, it's funny, you could look at those times where we're undergoing significant physical strain and like really getting after it. My coach was a hard ass, sorry for the language, I guess, but
Yeah.
we would go through some really intense physical outputs, and I would have to pull myself out of those sometimes, even if it was punishment. And while he and I didn't always see eye to eye everywhere else, he and I were committed. I was like, hey, I'm going to be honest with you about where I'm at. And will just probably need to step out for 5-10 minutes to fix a blood sugar every now and again. And that was true, mostly in practice, because also I wanted to stay in the game always. But
Right.
I did feel like, there was only maybe 1 or 2 games where I felt like, hey, like I got to come out and treat my blood sugar really quick and then I can go back in. So yeah, I was very fortunate that, once I started really playing meaningful minutes, I had kind of experienced over the years in practice, kind of learning from the pitfalls of what was going to cause me to go high or what was going to cause me to go low and not be able to meet the demands of the game.
Well, and it sounds like you had a pretty mutually respectful relationship with the coach. Like both of you had that respect, and like you said, maybe you didn't see eye to eye on game things, but when it came to your health, you guys were on the same page. So let's say, or you tell me, am I accurate in that?
Yeah, I think it is hard sometimes in the heat of the moment to say, hey, coach, I've got this is at the top of my list. It may not
Yeah.
be at the top of yours, but like I've got to do it. And there were some tough, tense moments, I think, and also just some lack of understanding. But I think at the end of it, looking back, there was a respect for, hey, I didn't necessarily know or realize all the things you were balancing in your head. And I think he will probably be a better coach to the next person who has some sort of need like that throughout his career because of what we went through together.
Well, and I feel like not to say the education hasn't come a long way since back when you're describing, or even when I'm describing, about a decade or so ago. But I would like to think that there'd be a little bit more education at this point, where coaches may say, okay, type 1 diabetes, not as big of a deal. People can rattle off all the professional athletes who have had it. Nothing compared to when it seemed like this big scary thing. But I know when I was back in high school, and I remember vividly, I played high school volleyball because I had it up in, for dudes up in Wisconsin. And there were a couple times where you mentioned, the punishment. We would be having to run sprints or, suicides or whatever sorts of drills because we didn't play hard enough or we lost or whatever it was. And there were a couple times my blood sugar went super low at a practice and I wouldn't run that sprint. And the people on my team would start giving me a hard time with it, even though they very well knew that my blood sugar was the issue there. So, did you ever have any experiences like that? And if so, how did you handle getting your teammates to buy in and understand, hey, this is my health. This is something that's really important so I can be the best version of me for this team?
I think what you're describing is the hardest part. For me, it never was anything verbalized, and I knew my teammates didn't think that I was opting out of drills or punishment because I wanted to or because it was easy to do so. That being said, my internal monologue felt like every time I pulled myself out, everybody was looking at me as like, oh, well, Rob always has this card he can play to get out of the tough conditioning days. And, that's just Rob's diabetes always comes up when we're doing the hardest stuff. Now, the reality is that when you're being punished and you're running multiple suicides back to back to back, sometimes, we did this punishment one time where we ran like a suicide every minute on the minute for like 20 minutes.
Ooh.
And you had to try to finish them in under 30 seconds. And those drills are designed to make people quit. So, that's what he was trying to do for some of the guys on the team. And so navigating those days. And then there were days where like my blood sugar was great and I was one of the most fit guys on the team. And then there were days where we'd run two suicides and I had to pull myself out for a low blood sugar or a high blood sugar and miss that part of the conditioning. And so I think for me, the hard part was my teammates mostly were also my roommates and my close friends, still close friends to this day. And they just got to the point where like, Rob's going to do everything that we do, not just in school, not just on the team, not just like when we're out and about, but every now and then, like diabetes is going to throw him a curveball and he's going to have to like step out or do something differently. Like we're not going to worry about him. And I think that was my like line for them. I was like, I'm in charge of it. I'm going to take care of myself. Just trust that I'm doing the best that I can to stay in all the time. And we had that shared understanding. There were tough moments, really low moments for me where I just felt like I wasn't doing it right. And I felt like behind my back, they must all be saying those things. But I think that's just like main character syndrome. They probably never even thought a second about it.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like that's the thing is we always think there's that spotlight effect where there's this beam just shining down on us when the reality is they're more focused on completing the drill in under 30 seconds for every single rep. So that ends up being that spotlight where nobody actually is paying that much attention. And if they are, I would hope, whether it's, on a team or in a different setting, that people would say, hey, let me confront or let me go approach them and come to some sort of, hey, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And hopefully they're understanding and accommodating, because I'm sure, like you said, the coaches you can have a tense relationship with, the other players can have a tense relationship with. And it's something where I feel like if you come with open arms and say, hey, I'm going to do these things and I'm going to do them to the best of my ability. And in my case, I would even make up the reps I would miss. If I missed 7 of the reps on the sprints back and forth, when my blood sugar came up, I would immediately go do them, even if everyone was doing something else. So there was that, I'm going to still show you that I didn't just do this just for the sake of sitting out and being a bum. It's, I need to do this for my health right now. So if there's something like that, I feel like there's a way to make sure everyone's on the same page, because when that team's cohesive, it obviously helps everyone play better.
Yeah, I think that there's a way forward. You can find a way to
Right.
do it, whether you make them up at a different time, whether, I think it comes from vulnerability.
Right.
It takes strength to admit that you live with a disability, because I think the first thing we want to celebrate is like doing things in spite of diabetes. But then when diabetes interrupts us from doing what we want, we feel shame about it, as if like we are supposed to be perfect all the time. And so, I think there aren't that many diabetes professional athletes. There aren't that many diabetic college athletes. There aren't that many elite athletes with diabetes, because there aren't, diabetes is still a small percentage of the population from a type 1 perspective. So you may be the first person with diabetes that your school, your coach, your league has ever seen. So on one hand, you're a trailblazer. On the other hand, you've got to learn on the job, and it's not going to always be easy. I was the first athlete with type 1 at my college, and they learned from me. And now the next person won't have to go through necessarily the things that I had to do. They still will have to go through the challenges, obviously, but there's more context there. So I think like viewing yourself as a trailblazer and, giving yourself grace to, not have to be perfect is something that I think that I would tell my kid if they had diabetes, like going into, the college athletics world.
Well, and then I feel like giving grace, athletics or not, is such a big thing in diabetes, because you're not going to be perfect. Like right now, my blood sugar is 173. I'm not perfect. I'm not perfectly in range. I just ate. But at the same time, you're not always going to be in range 100% of the time, no matter how tightly you monitor.
No, and I'm not in range right now either. I'm like 190. I just had some people at the office ordered bagels from this bagel shop, so I had a bagel sandwich, and I mean that's just a carby, fatty load that and now I'm sitting down. So of course, like some our pumps and our our pre-boluses can only work as hard as they work. And so it's just part of it is just experimentation. It is a little bit of science. It doesn't have to be perfect all the time.
Well, and going back to the lows, 'cause I know a lot of the patients I work with, they have issues with low blood sugars from longer duration exercise. So I'm thinking of right now when you're talking about practices predominantly, because adrenaline's a whole nother beast when it comes to sports. But you have, the conditioning weeks, or you have hey, we're doing 2-a-days, or we're playing for 4 hours, and you're at altitude and all these other things. What would be your best, advice to someone for how to avoid those low blood sugars during, longer duration sports, or even just, a cardio centered workout?
Yeah, I think insulin on board is key. Just knowing when you're operating at kind of like zone 2 cardio, zone 3 cardio, where you're not fully exerting yourself, it's not high intensity, but it's a long duration, you're going to become more insulin sensitive. That is one of the great benefits of exercise. So just be prepared to go down. Even if some people I will see, they'll start a workout intentionally a little bit out of range on the high side, trusting that over the period of that workout class or over the period of their, session, that they're going to come back down. And so they're kind of mitigating that, from the start. I'd say like always be prepared. Keep some Gatorade in your gym bag. That I had Gatorades every season that I would just buy. I'd go to Costco and I'd get a big 24 pack of Gatorade and I'd just put it in the practice closet because and the training room. I'd be like, hey, this is medicinal. This is for Rob's low blood sugar emergencies. So let's keep this handy. So I think being prepared, setting yourself up for success, really trying to dial in a routine. And I think journaling and like noting and taking, inventory of like how your blood sugars do, where you start at, where you finish at, and trying to help like be curious about what influences it. And also understand that every practice is not the same. Every game is not the same. And you're going to have to, adjust and move along the way.
I gotta say, with the Gatorade, I probably got the same thing as you, the little Gatorade All Stars, like the 12-ounce ones that were like blue and purple and red. I feel like I've been scarred because that's all I drank for like 6 years growing up. And I'm just like, I can't ever have them again because I feel like that flavor fatigue is just everlasting.
And the Gatorade All Stars taste different than the regular Gatorade. I don't know what it is,
Yes.
but yeah, I'm like I can physically feel drinking it right now. Yeah, it certainly like brings me back to like middle of practice, treating a low blood sugar with the Gatorade All Star. They're also like 24 carbs. It like wasn't a
Yep.
big Gatorade. You could chug them pretty easily. So yeah, fond memories on the sideline with some Gatorade All Stars for sure.
I was say these days I'm all about the regular body armor. 'Cause at least you get the potassium in there too. So I'm like, let's go. And then shout out Kobe, the investor in body armor. But with your career, obviously you played college, and then there was another chapter afterwards. So can you share a little bit about that? Because I'd love for people to kind of understand the transition, even from, hey, I went from college to this completely other legitimate ball game.
Yeah, so the second half of my senior season, I finally kind of broke through and had, my best season of my career. I had played with some pros, I had been around pros in my summer workouts, and I felt like I could play at the highest level. Maybe not the NBA, but that I could find a spot somewhere in between college and the NBA. And there were a lot of leagues. I graduated college the year of the NBA lockout in 2011. And so the summer of 2011. So there were not a lot of jobs available because NBA guys were going overseas and getting those. But I had the opportunity. I got I went to a camp that I got invited to. I got an agent from that camp. My agent, kind of put me in this position to get some offers. I ended up signing a deal with the team that I ended up not ever going to play for, just because they sold the team like right before I was supposed to go. So I very much experienced like the journeyman aspect of pro sports, where there is this big disparity between being a pro and being in the NBA and like making life-changing money, and even at the top of the Euro League. So for me, I knew that I had a short shelf life. I was 22, kind of 23 at the time. And when that first deal didn't go through, that kind of like threw a wrench in my plans. So I stayed on my job at the time. I was working at USA Boxing. They were supportive of me chasing my basketball dream as well as working for them. So I hired a trainer who became my longtime trainer. We're going to do an event with him this year with Diabetics Doing Things, which is pretty awesome. I got through the next year. I was playing 6 nights a week in men's leagues and pro-am leagues and traveling around like Southern Colorado playing against JUCOs with this sort of travel team. I played a couple of CBA games, played, anywhere that I could play, I was playing multiple times per week, sometimes 2 a days while working my job. I improved athletically. I became a better basketball player. And then the next year I got a chance to go play against the Harlem Globetrotters as a member of the Washington Generals. And again, got to be at least the first documented member of the Washington Generals playing with type 1 diabetes. So that is kind of my like diabetes claim to fame. And I will say it was different going from like my approach to going to college was very different than my approach in the pros because we were very upfront, my parents and I, during that recruiting process of telling them about my diabetes. Kind of the opposite on the pro side because the way I like to say it is that there were tons of reasons for teams to not sign me that had nothing to do with diabetes. I was undersized. I was not as fast as I needed to be. I maybe didn't shoot it as well as I should for my position. And there were a lot of guys like me around. So as a pro, I was pretty like middle of the road. So I kept that to myself. So going and playing that entire tour, traveling all over the world, I think I did 82 shows over 60 some odd cities. And they never knew I had diabetes. My teammates obviously knew because they were around me and in the locker room, but from an organization standpoint, there was no discussion about that. So that was a lot of anxiety as well of like really making sure my blood sugars were going to be okay so that I didn't get I didn't jeopardize my job. And I think that's a thing that when you think about pro sports, you sort of have to be all in. You can't really have a plan B. So my plan A was really making sure that my blood sugars were in range more often than not so that I could play as good as I could play because in order for me to be successful at the professional level, I had to be my best all the time, every day, no matter where we were, no matter how many games we had played that week, or else someone else was going to take my job.
And 80 plus games and 60 plus cities. And how short of a period of time was that? Like
We're
3 months?
talking like 7 months, yeah, like total of 7 months.
Holy
So like,
smokes.
and some of those trips were overseas. I got to play on the USS John C. Stennis, which is an active aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf. Got some amazing experiences that I would not trade for the world. And I was every time we'd go into a room, they'd have like a media room with some like Gatorade or candy, and I would grab that and like put it in my gym bag so I'd have some low snacks for the road trips. And I think I was scratching and clawing for every bit of playing time, for every experience, and always to make sure that my diabetes was not going to stop me from doing what I wanted to do. And I was fortunate to get through that.
I can just picture you in that room going in there and just like sneaking in there and just grabbing like 3 Gatorades, stashing them away, grabbing a bunch of the candy. But in reality, though, you obviously were being very well prepared. You had your pregame routine, you knew what you were doing, but that grind had to have taken some sort of toll on you after a while from a blood sugar standpoint, or did it not? I mean, share a little on that because I feel like that's a unique experience that a lot of people don't get to, have.
The schedule is hard. It's demanding for sure. I've been very fortunate in my life since I've been diagnosed. My blood sugar has never been higher than 7.1 or 2. So my from an A1C standpoint, I would probably tell you that my time in range, if there was such a thing, was probably
Yeah.
not super high.
Mm.
If I could have tracked that at the time, but again, I was able to do what I wanted to do, and I think there were, like I said, there were a lot of reasons why I didn't play professionally for very long, but diabetes wasn't one of them, in my opinion, and I'm thankful for that. And I think again, I had to prove some of it to myself. My body could not take the demands of a pro basketball schedule, but I think for extended period of time, like it was pretty obvious to me at the end of my first season that it was going to take a significant commitment to even be able to make $500 a month after that playing pro hoops for me. And I just didn't have that kind of runway. And so I shifted into, the professional world after that because I always sort of knew that would be waiting for me. I had my degree, which I think is super important if you're an athlete to get your degree. If you have that, you can at least go try to play sports and come back and, have some sort of chance. That may not be as true for people today. I don't want to get into that discussion, but that for me and my parents, like we had the discussion like, hey, finish your degree and then you can do whatever you want because you've done the thing that requires you to be, to get a job at a big company or like to get a desk job or whatever the case. So I knew that there'd be a desk job that I could get. And when I was done playing ball. I was able to do that with sort of no regrets because I had lived the experience, and it's obviously
Mhm.
a huge part of my story. I will say we've only been able to kind of talk about it at a high level, but there were so many low moments throughout my college career, throughout my, in between trying to decide whether I was going to try to continue to play professionally or not. There were a lot of moments wondering whether I was doing the right thing. Was I wasting my time? But I'm so glad that I did because it is part of my story today. And, it's a unique experience that not very many people get to do and that I only had a short window to do and I took advantage of. And so I would just encourage anyone out there, whether you have diabetes or not, to expand your mind as to what you think could be possible for yourself. That you can tell yourself a story. There's always a million reasons why not to do something, but you can tap in and surprise yourself when you really dig in and really commit to making your dream come true. And it was always my dream since I was a kid to play pro basketball, to wear a pro jersey with my name on the back and the team on the front. And I can also tell you that while it was challenging from a blood sugar standpoint, I would gladly trade sitting at a desk all day to working out 3 times a day and traveling all over and being poor and and broke and just and putting my career on hold. Because I did that, I'm the person that I am today. And so I would just encourage people that if there's something out there that you want to tackle, that you want to take on, why not you? Why shouldn't you be the first person with diabetes to do whatever it is that you want to do? And so as shifting back to sort of modern day, that's what I'm trying to do with diabetics doing things is when you get diagnosed, the first thing that you do is look for somebody who does what you do with diabetes. And I want to be that resource for people, not just for people who are like me and wanted to play basketball, but for people who want to be actors or people who want to be doctors or people who want to be nutritionists and who want to start their own business or want to be content creators. If I can find somebody with diabetes and talk to them on the podcast, it can help set that person up for success, and that's what I want ultimately.
Well, and I feel like you've inspired so many people at this point, not just from the story you told today, but just all of the work you've done collectively over the past, I guess, what, decade plus. You've been at the advocacy thing for a minute.
I have, and I think like part of it starts with advocating for yourself at your school, at your job, with your college recruiter, with your professional team. And I will say that it's work, it's real work. And I think that a lot of people want these things, and then they don't realize how much work it takes to get it done. We watch the Kobe videos on Instagram, and it's like, yes, like you got to get in there, you got to work, you got to love what you do. But if I didn't love basketball, like it was truly my first love, I would never have gone through all the pain and suffering that I went through. It would not have been worth it. But I still do it. I'm in playing in 2 leagues right now, and we're in the playoffs in both of them. I love the game, and it's the first thing that I was also really good at, and I think that also sticks with me and keeps me connected to it. But the biggest thing I learned, and it was probably after my freshman year of college, I went to IMG Academy over the summer, and I was training with
Yeah.
some pre-draft guys. Yeah, that's right. Florida over in Sarasota, this incredible facility, and this is summer of 2008. And I responded to the idea of turning pro, quote unquote turning pro. And it's not that you are getting paid for what you do, but you treat your work like a job. And basketball was not my hobby. It was now my full-time job. It was paying for my school. It was giving me access to things I wouldn't have otherwise. So whether I felt like it or not, I showed up. Whether I felt like going to get extra strength work in, I did. Whether I wanted to go get extra shots up on the weekend, whether everybody else was doing it or not, I did that because I knew if I could put in more time, if I could work on improving my craft, if I could be a better pro, if I carried myself like a professional, that was going to open up more opportunities for me. And I 100% believe that it did. There were a lot of other guys that could have gotten that general's job and a lot of other guys that have gotten it since. But I was a good locker room guy. I understood my role and I worked like a pro. And so it was a low risk for a team to take a chance on me over somebody else because they knew what they were getting. So, be a good teammate, be a good locker room guy, and work your butt off. And, I believe 100% that whether it's varsity sports, whether it's a college scholarship, whether it's becoming a professional video gamer, or, diabetes content creator or whatever you want to be, if you put yourself into it, if you turn pro and you say, I'm going to do everything that it takes, that everything that the best do to make myself the best I can be at this, I think that's the effort that it takes. And that's the mindset I would apply. And I do apply to new adventures and endeavors as well.
Well, and I'd say even people to apply that mindset to just their own diabetes, and maybe not necessarily saying, oh my God, every single day I'm pedal to the floor, but hey, what's that extra little step that I can do that other people may not be doing? But I know if I do this little thing, whether it's I took my insulin on time before the meal instead of right after I start eating, or, hey, I'm going to test one extra time during the day, or I'm going to make sure I get in that extra walk because my number's slightly high. Just that alone, that little extra effort is usually the difference between having the A1C that's higher than they want and not feeling their best versus feeling 100% and kicking butt and taking names. So I feel like, to your point there too, I'm sure you apply that to your own diabetes as well.
I'm glad that you said that it doesn't have to be like pedal to the metal. I also think, like, with the diabetes management, if you can, we talked about giving yourself grace a little bit earlier,
Yep.
but just having awareness and curiosity, and like understand like what gets managed gets measured. So whether that's a journal, there's a lot of great health journals out there that you can pick up. You can also just do it yourself. You can look at your judgment or your blood sugar without judgment. So say, okay, I'm right now probably, I was 190 with an arrow up, 15 minutes after eating a few minutes ago. So I'm probably peaked at like 205 and I'll come back down. Like, can I look at that number without judgment and say, okay, well, what could I do differently? Just because it wasn't the outcome that I wanted doesn't mean that I can't learn from it. It doesn't mean that I should be defeated by it. And I think that's another thing that sports and athletics taught me is that the best shooters only shoot 40%. So that's 6 out of 10 they're missing. The best batters only hit 3 out of 10. So that, the idea that you should expect that you're going to be perfect every time, is something that I think stops more people than it actually helps. So, make sure that you're curious about what you could do differently, and you have a beginner's mindset and a growth mindset where you're like, hey, I'm just getting started here. If you go to your first fitness class after you read or listen to this podcast and your blood sugar tanks and you have to like step out halfway through, can you still love yourself and do that? Like, look at all you did to get ready for that. Hey, next time you'll bring an extra Gatorade or a Gatorade All-Star or a juice box or something. And then you'll be able to, 6 months from now, complete that class. Be sure you're giving yourself credit for the growth that you've made along the way. You can Google my stats. They're not great, but I didn't give up and I got what I wanted. So, I think sometimes you just have to be relentless in your commitment to get what you want. And you'll be surprised that when you do that, how the universe sort of conspires to give you everything that you're working for. It doesn't happen all the time, but if you can stay focused, if you can stay committed and then recommit when times get tough, I fully believe that you will really surprise yourself with how much progress you can make.
I feel like, to your point, the commitment to the process versus the commitment to the outcome, because you might not have that perfect blood sugar. You may go up, for all because you're so hyped up and concerned. Oh my God, what if my number tanks, that your number goes up really high? But regardless, if you're committed to, hey, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to do the things that I know how to do and the things that I'm going to do best, I've talked about with my care team, etc., then it's only going to lead to better outcomes over time. But if you're not committed to the process of even trying, then you're never going to end up getting where you want to be. Diabetes or really anything.
I will tell you, and this is sort of my like clickbaity headline I've been telling everybody recently, is that I'm disappointed to report that everything that they tell you, everything that's out there in literature, in motivation accounts or self-care, mindfulness, journaling, exercise, hydration, sleep, therapy, all of those things they work, and that is what it takes to be successful. I'm disappointed that there's not a silver bullet. I'm disappointed that there's not just one day that you wake up and you're master of the universe. But the only thing that we're guaranteed in this life is that this life will end at some point, and we will not be immortal in our current state. So stop trying to be perfect, stop trying to be immortal. And just appreciate every moment that you have and make the choice to make the most out of the time that you've been given. And I think, as I continue to grow and I continue to examine and, kind of just get older and age, like, I'm just aging in a modern time. Well, release that pressure of having to be master of the universe. Release that pressure of never having to take an L. Just learn. You're not going to win every single time. You can't control every single variable, but you can control your mindset, You can control your effort. You can control your attitude. And the best ability is availability. Be available to yourself, be available to your team members, and be available to, to move when things change and to adjust on the fly. Just like sometimes you drink that coffee in the morning and your blood sugar goes sky high. Sometimes you drink it and nothing happens. You've got to adjust either way. And I think diabetes is a great metaphor for life on just because you've done something the same way over a long period of time doesn't mean that will continue. And what are you going to do when everything that you planned on doesn't go the way that you planned? What's your plan then? And if you have an answer to that and you can do it without judgment and you can still love yourself throughout it, I think that's where you can really find success and happiness in whatever you're trying to do.
That hits so deep right there. But what I will say is we are going to go on for like 10 years. And I know that not everyone's going to want to listen for 10 years. So I got one question that I'm thinking I want to make a thing, for the final question for the people. And
I love it.
What would be, everyone talks about, okay, what's the thing you would tell people when if they were just diagnosed yesterday, but I kind of want to know, what is that biggest underrated secret that you have that helps your blood sugar? Like, what is that thing? For example, some people might say, oh, I walk every day at this point, or there were some people that might, for me, I'd say potassium helps my blood sugar stay in better range. What is that thing that no one thinks about that helps you the most?
It's funny because my answer to this, if you had asked me years ago, I might get more tactical. I might say carb counting. I might say pre-bolusing. I might say exercise. But I'm going to go even more critical and even more mundane. And I'm just going to say sleep. Because sleep, we know as people with diabetes, if we don't sleep, our blood sugars are going to be really wild the next day. Or if we get a bad night's sleep, I'm talking like less than 4 hours or like 3 hours, or we're on like our sleep is dysregulated or disordered for some reason, our blood sugars are going to be out of range the next day. And for a long time, I used to think that was the diabetes. But for people without diabetes and they're on that sleep schedule, that's true for them too. It has honestly nothing to do with your diabetes. So sleep to me is the perfect foundation for a day of great blood sugars. If you can get some good rest and allow your body to recover, then all of your organs, all of your insulin sensitivity, all of your stress is going to be regulated in a way that's going to allow you to be more successful with your diabetes, with your exercise, with your attitude, all of those things. So the one thing I would say is to just get as much sleep as you need. Everybody's got Apple Watches, everybody's got Fitbits or Whoop trackers. Find what works for you and do a little study on your sleep, or even do it manually and just say, am I a better person when I get 7 hours, 8 hours, however much you need? LeBron sleeps 12 hours a night and he's pretty successful, I think. So don't judge yourself if you need a little bit more sleep than the average person.
I was going to say, I got to get me one of those Whoops because I don't have any tracker for my sleep yet, but I definitely agree that that's one of those X factors that does not get nearly enough love. And thank you again for coming on, sharing your story. Where can people find you, find diabetics doing things so they can, get to know you more?
Yeah, Google me, baby. Like Jay-Z says, it's just I'm Rob Howe Diabetes. Google Rob Howe Diabetes, you'll find me. Diabeticsdoingthings.com, Rob Howe 21 on all the platforms. Please, get in touch. I'm here to answer any and all basketball related diabetes questions. That's kind of my sweet spot, and anything else that you're looking for. Again, I've been doing this now for 8 years in the diabetes community, and I'm just really getting started to understand what my role and impact can be longer term. I'm excited to hear that you're going to be doing this for 10 years, because that means I'll be back. And, I think, I just want to make sure that everybody out there is listening and knows that wherever you're at today, just be consistent with a little bit, getting better every day. It's not going to, like you said, fall in love with the process. Life is a process. You're never going to reach a destination that you don't have any problems with or any problems at. So just keep at it, keep going, stay in the fight, and I'll see you there.
The man, the myth, the legend, Rob Howe. Thank you so much. Definitely going to have you back soon.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate it, man.